I never thought my son would choose his wife over the woman who raised him alone. The morning Maley called to tell me Elena didn't want me around the café anymore, I was holding my grandmother's porcelain coffee cup, the same one I'd used every morning for 30 years. She feels uncomfortable when you're there, Mom, he said, his voice distant and careful. Maybe it's time you took a step back from the business. I set the cup down so gently it didn't make a sound, but inside something shattered. 40 years of single motherhood, my entire retirement savings invested in his dream, and this was my reward. But what Maley didn't know was that legally, I owned more than he realized. What happens when the woman who funded your entire life decides she's had enough of being pushed aside? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of waves crashing against the Oregon coastline had always been my morning meditation, but that Tuesday it felt like a funeral dirge. I sat on my back porch, wrapped in the navy blue shawl my late husband David had brought me from Ireland, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of coral and gold. At 65, I thought I had earned the right to peaceful mornings, too. Coffee that stayed warm while I watched seagulls dance over the tide pools. Instead, I was replaying my son's words like a broken record. My name is Elena, and until yesterday, I believed I had successfully navigated the transition from active mother to supportive grandmother, from career woman to retired advisor. The cottage where I've lived for the past 8 years sits just 3 blocks from downtown Seabrook, close enough that I could walk to Maley's Café, my café, really every morning to help with the early baking shift and greet the regulars who would become like family. The business had been my idea, born from watching Maley struggle through a series of dead-end marketing jobs after college. I want to do something meaningful, Mom, he told me during one of our evening walks along the shore. Something that brings people together. That's when I suggested the cafe concept, combining his love for coffee culture with my grandmother's traditional baking recipes. The old Victorian building on Harbour Street had been for sale for months, its previous owners unable to make the restaurant business work in our small coastal town. I remember the day we first walked through that empty space together. Maley's eyes lit up as he described his vision: exposed brick walls lined with local art, mismatched vintage furniture creating cozy conversation nooks, the smell of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls drawing people in from the street. It could be special, Mom, really special. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself calculating numbers in my head. The accountant in me never fully retired. The investment had been substantial. My entire severance package from the firm where I'd worked for 23 years, plus a significant portion of my retirement savings, plus the proceeds from selling David's vintage car collection. Nearly $200,000 total, all of it flowing into permits, renovations, equipment, and initial operating expenses. We'd structured it carefully with my attorney, Mr. Carrington. Officially, I was a silent partner with a 60% stake, while Maley held 40% and ran daily operations. This way, you can step back whenever you want, Maley had assured me during the paperwork signing. But we'll make sure you're protected financially. The irony of those words now felt like a knife turning in my chest. The Seabrook Coffee Company had become everything we'd dreamed. Local fishermen stopped by before dawn for coffee and homemade pastries. Tourists discovered us through word of mouth and glowing online reviews. The vintage Edison bulbs cast warm light over animated conversations between regulars who'd never met before entering our doors. We hosted poetry readings on Thursday nights, displayed rotating exhibits by local artists, and during the holidays, the cafe transformed into something magical with white lights strung across the ceiling and fresh evergreen garlands framing. The windows. Elena had appeared in Maley's life 2 years after we opened, a sleek marketing consultant who'd moved to Seabrook to escape the rat race of Portland. She was undeniably striking, sharp cheekbones, perfectly styled blonde hair, and a wardrobe that managed to look both casual and expensive. I'd tried to welcome her, to include her in our Friday family dinners and holiday traditions, but there had always been a coolness in her green eyes when she looked at me, a subtle tension that seemed to build rather than ease over time. The wedding had been elegant but small, held in the cafe's garden during cherry blossom season. I'd worn my best dress, a soft lavender number that Frankie, my best friend, had helped me choose, and tried to ignore the way Elena's family seemed to form their own cluster, speaking in undertones about Maley's little business and how quaint everything was. During her maid of honour speech, Elena's sister had mentioned their exciting plans for expansion and modernisation, words that sent a chill through me even then. Over the following months, I began to notice changes. Subtle at first, Elena suggesting we switch to more sophisticated suppliers, pushing for renovations that would eliminate the vintage charm in favour of sleek minimalism. She started referring to the café as their vision and would redirect conversations when I mentioned the early days or my grandmother's recipes that had become customer favourites. "Mom, Elena has some really good ideas about updating our brand," Maley would say, and I'd watch him use the word out while looking only at his wife. The recipes that had drawn people from neighbouring towns were gradually being replaced with trendy items that tasted like they came from any generic coffee chain. The poetry readings ended because Elena felt they attracted the wrong demographic. The local art displays were replaced with mass-produced prints that matched the new colour scheme. I tried to address my concerns diplomatically. "The recipes are part of our identity," I told them during a monthly business meeting. Customers asked specifically for Grandma Rose's cinnamon rolls. Elena had smiled that practice smile and responded, "Tradition is important, Selena, but we need to think about scalability and market positioning." Market positioning. As if the cafe was a corporate acquisition rather than a labour of love built on family recipes and community connections. The most painful part was watching Maley transform alongside the business. The enthusiastic young man who'd once called me his business partner and best friend became increasingly distant, more concerned with profit margins than customer relationships. He stopped asking for my input on decisions and would sometimes seem surprised to find me in the kitchen during my usual morning baking shift. "You don't need to come in so early, Mom," he'd said just last week. "Elena and I have the morning routine handled now." The dismissal was gentle but unmistakable. I was being edged out of the very thing I'd created and funded. Last night, after Maley's phone call, I'd pulled out the original business documents from my filing cabinet. Mr. Carrington had been thorough in protecting my interests, though I'd never imagined I'd need that protection from my own son. The paperwork was clear. As the majority investor, I retained certain rights that Maley and Elena seemed to have forgotten about or perhaps never fully understood. Frankie had called around 9, her voice sharp with indignation after I'd filled her in. "That little princess doesn't get to push you out of your own business," she'd said. And shame on Maley for letting her. Frankie had been my voice of reason for over 40 years. Ever since we'd met in high school algebra class, she'd buried 2 husbands and raised 3 children largely on her own. And she had zero tolerance for what she called family nonsense. "What are you going to do?" she'd asked, and I'd realised I didn't have an answer. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly powerless, caught between my love for my son and my need to protect myself from further humiliation. But as I sat on my porch this morning, watching the sun climb higher over the Pacific, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who'd raised a child alone after David's sudden heart attack at 38, who'd built a successful accounting practice from nothing, who'd funded her son's dreams with her own security, that woman wasn't going to be dismissed so easily. I stood up, carried my empty coffee cup inside, and walked to my desk where the business contracts waited. It was time to remind my son exactly who his partner really was. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I arrived at the cafe Thursday morning at my usual time, 5:30, early enough to have the first batch of pastries ready before the fisherman's rush, only to find the locks had been changed. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, my key useless in my hand, feeling like a stranger at my own front door. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just 18 months ago, we'd celebrated the cafe's second anniversary with a block party that brought half the town out to Harbour Street. Elena had insisted on professional photography for the event, hiring someone from Portland to capture what she called milestone moments. In one of those photos, the one that still hung in my hallway at home, the 3 of us stood behind the counter, arms linked, smiling as if we'd always be partners in this dream. That photo felt like evidence from a different lifetime now. I called Maley from my car, watching the sun begin to paint the storefront windows gold. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Mum, what's wrong?" "It's barely dawn. The locks have been changed," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I can't get into the cafe." A pause. Then, "Oh, right. Elena thought it would be better if we handled the morning prep ourselves from now on. We should have mentioned that yesterday. Should have mentioned it." As if locking me out of my own business was a minor scheduling detail they'd forgotten to include in casual conversation. "Maley," I said carefully, "we need to talk. In person, this morning. Mom, we're really busy today. Elena's got meetings with suppliers, and I need to this morning," I repeated, and something in my tone must have cut through his deflection because he agreed to meet me at Harbour Park in an hour. I spent that hour walking the beach, letting the rhythmic crash of waves calm the storm building in my chest. By the time I reached the park, Maley was already there, sitting on our old bench, the one where we'd shared countless conversations during his teenage years, where he told me about his first heartbreak, his college fears, his dreams for the future. He looked older than his 40 years that morning, stress lines creasing his forehead, his dark hair showing more grey than I remembered. When he saw me approaching, he stood with the awkward posture of someone preparing for an unpleasant conversation. "Mom, before you say anything, I want you to know this isn't personal. Elena and I have been talking about the business direction, and we think it's time for some changes." I sat down on the bench and gestured for him to join me. "What kind of changes?" He remained standing, which felt like its own answer. "We want to expand. Maybe open a second location in Newport, eventually franchise the concept, but that requires a different kind of management structure. More professional, less ... He struggled for the words. "Less family," I supplied. "Less informal," he corrected, but his eyes avoided mine. "Elena has experience with scaling businesses. She thinks we've been too sentimental about some of our practices." Sentimental. The word hit me like a physical blow. Was that what my grandmother's recipes had become? Sentiment was the personal touch that had made customers drive 30 minutes from neighbouring towns now just outdated nostalgia. "And where do I fit in this new professional structure?" I asked. Maley finally sat down, but at the far end of the bench, maintaining distance. "We'd like to buy out your share. Elena's family has offered to invest in the expansion, and it would be cleaner if we simplified the ownership structure." The audacity of it took my breath away. They wanted to buy me out with my own money because where exactly did they think the capital for this expansion would come from? Not from the modest profits of a 2-year-old cafe in a town of 3,000 people. "How much are you offering?" I asked. 50,000, he said, quickly, as if the speed of delivery might make the insult less obvious. I laughed. Actually laughed, which seemed to surprise him. $50,000 for a business I'd invested nearly $200,000 in creating. A business that was finally turning a solid profit thanks to the foundation I'd built. That's not going to work, Maley. His jaw tight under expression I recognized from his teenage years when he didn't get his way. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't expect to recoup your full investment immediately. That's not how business works." "I know exactly how business works," I said, standing up. I was running profit and loss statements before Elena was born. What I'm trying to understand is how my son convinced himself that cheating his mother out of her life savings is a reasonable business practice. "Nobody's cheating anyone," he said, his voice rising. "We're offering you a fair price for a minority stake in a small town cafe." Minority stake. I stared at him. "Maley, I own 60% of that business. I have the contracts to prove it." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "That was just the initial setup. Things have changed. Elena and I have put in sweat equity, time, management. Elena has put in management." I interrupted. "Elena, who showed up 2 years after we opened. Elena, who's been systematically dismantling everything that made the cafe special." My voice was getting louder, and I could see him glance around the empty park. Embarrassed by his mother's lack of decorum. "Don't talk about my wife that way," he said, sharply. And there it was. The line drawn in the sand, his wife versus his mother. And he'd already chosen sides. "Your wife," I said slowly, "who apparently hates me so much that you change the locks rather than have an honest conversation about your plans. She doesn't hate you, Mom. She just thinks it's healthier if we establish some boundaries, some space, boundaries, the language of therapy and self-help books, clinical words to dress up the ugly reality of being discarded." "What kind of space are we talking about, exactly?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe you could visit less frequently. And we'd handle all the business decisions going forward. Elena thinks it would be less confusing for customers if they dealt with a consistent management team, less confusing for customers." As if the woman who'd been greeting regulars by name since day one was somehow creating confusion by her very presence. I studied my son's face, looking for some trace of the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd made me hand-drawn Mother's Day cards every year until he was 16, who'd sobbed in my arms when his father died and told me I was the strongest person he knew. That boy was gone, replaced by this stranger who spoke in corporate buzzwords and seemed genuinely puzzled by his mother's resistance to being erased. "Let me make sure I understand," I said. "You want me to sell you my majority stake in the business I funded and built for 1/4 of what I invested, so that you and Elena can expand using her family's money while I step back and visit less frequently? You're making it sound worse than it is, am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're stealing my business and calling it a family reorganization. That's not fair. Mom, we're trying to do what's best for everyone." "No," I said quietly. "You're trying to do what's best for Elena. What's convenient for Elena? What makes Elena comfortable? When did her comfort become more important than my dignity?" He stood up abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes, David's eyes, though David would never have looked at me with such coldness. "You know what? Maybe Elena's right. Maybe you are too involved. Maybe this is exactly why we need some distance." The words hung in the soiled air between us like a challenge. I felt something break inside my chest, not shattering but hardening, like metal cooling into an unbreakable shape. "All right," I said calmly. "Distance it is." I walked away from the bench, from my son, from the park, where we'd shared so many important conversations. Behind me, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn around. I had spent 40 years teaching him that actions have consequences. It was time for him to learn that lesson as an adult. When I got home, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Mr. Carrington's number. He answered on the second ring, his familiar gravelly voice warm with genuine affection. "Selena, my dear, what can I do for you?" "I need to review the business contracts," I said. "All of them. And I need to understand exactly what my options are." A pause. Should I be concerned? I looked at the family photo hanging in my hallway, the three of us smiling behind the cafe counter, arms linked like we were unbreakable. "Let's just say I'm ready to exercise some of those protective clauses you insisted on including." Mr. Carrington chuckled, and I could practically hear him settling back in his chair with interest. "Well then, I think this afternoon just became much more interesting. Come by at 2 and bring everything you have." I hung up the phone and made myself a cup of tea chamomile. For comment, sat down to think. For 2 years, I'd watched Elena slowly erase me from the business I'd created. I'd accepted it because I thought family meant compromise, because I believed love required sacrifice. But there's a difference between sacrifice and being sacrificed. And I was done being the offering on the altar of my son's marriage. Elena wanted distance. She was about to learn that distance was a two-way street. And some roads, once taken, don't lead back home. Mr. Carrington's office smelled like leather and old books, a comforting combination that reminded me of my father's study. At 72, Harold Carrington was sharp as ever, his silver hair perfectly combed and his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he spread the business documents across his mahogany desk. He'd been our family attorney for over 20 years, handling David's estate and helping me navigate the legal complexities of single motherhood. "Well, my dear," he said after reviewing the contracts for the third time, I have to say I'm rather impressed with my younger self. These protective clauses are quite comprehensive. I leaned forward in the burgundy leather chair across from his desk. What exactly do they protect? Your investment, primarily. As the majority stakeholder, you retain certain rights that cannot be diluted without your express consent. He pointed to a specific paragraph with his gold pen. This clause here specifies that any major business decisions, including expansion, location changes, or ownership restructuring require approval from shareholders holding more than 50% of the company, which is me. Which is you. Additionally, he flipped to another page. This section establishes your right to call for a sale of business assets if you determine that your investment is being mismanaged or if there's a fundamental breach of the original partnership agreement. I felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. What constitutes a fundamental breach? Excluding you from business operations you're contractually entitled to participate in would certainly qualify. Changing locks, making unilateral decisions about suppliers or menu items, refusing to honour your established role, all of these could be considered breaches. Mr. Carrington removed his glasses and looked at me directly. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about Maley's offer of $50,000, about Elena's clinical language of boundaries and professional management, about the way my own son had looked at me like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than the woman who'd made his dreams possible. I want to understand all my options, I said. Over the next hour, Mr. Carrington outlined scenarios I hadn't even considered. I could demand reinstatement of my operational role and threaten legal action if they refused. I could force them to honour my 60% ownership and give me controlling vote on all decisions. I could call for an independent business valuation to establish fair market value before considering any buyout offers. Or I could exercise the nuclear option. There's one more possibility, Mr. Carrington said, his tone careful, given that you hold majority ownership and they've essentially locked you out of your own business. You have the right to force a sale of the entire operation. Force a sale, you can put the business on the market and require them to either buy you out at fair market value, which would be considerably more than their $50,000 offer, or accept whatever offer comes from external buyers. The implications hit me like a cold wave. They'd lose the business entirely. They'd have the opportunity to purchase your share at market rates. But if they can't afford it, double quotes, he shrugged. Business is business. Selena, you didn't invest your life savings to be treated like an inconvenient relative at a family reunion. I left Mr. Carrington's office with copies of all the contracts and a clear understanding of my legal position. But understanding my rights and deciding how to use them were two different things. I drove home slowly, taking the scenic route along the coast, trying to process the possibility of essentially destroying my son's dream business to protect my own dignity. At home, I found Frankie waiting on my front porch with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. At 66, she was still a force of nature, silver haircut in a stylish bob, bright red lipstick, and the kind of direct gaze that had intimidated men and inspired women for decades. Well, she demanded before I'd even unlocked the front door, what did Harold say? I let us in and poured 2 glasses of her wine, a crisp Oregon Pinot Grigio, before recounting my meeting with Mr. Carrington. Frankie listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. So you could essentially evict them from their own business, she said when I finished. It's not their business, I said quietly. It's my business. I've just been letting them run it. Damn right, it's your business. And what do you think you should do about it? I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the herbs I'd planted last spring: rosemary, thyme, oregano, all the ingredients that had made their way into my grandmother's recipes, and eventually into the cafe's signature items. On the counter sat Grandma Rose's handwritten recipe book, its pages yellowed with age and spotted with decades of flour and vanilla extract. I keep thinking about this recipe book, I said, running my fingers over the worn leather cover, when I gave Elena my grandmother's cinnamon roll recipe. She changed it. Said the original was too heavy for modern tastes. She cut the butter by half and replaced the brown sugar with some artificial sweetener blend, and customers started complaining. They said the rolls didn't taste the same. But instead of going back to the original recipe, Elena just stopped making them altogether, replaced them with some trendy pastry she found in a food magazine. Frankie came to stand beside me. "It's not about the cinnamon rolls, is it?" "No," I admitted. "It's about respect. It's about acknowledgement. It's about the fact that my son is willing to erase me from the business I created because his wife finds my existence inconvenient. So what are you going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Maley's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my stomach tighten. I answered on the third ring. "Mom." "Hi, listen, Elena and I talked, and we think maybe we came across too strong this morning. We'd like to take you to dinner tonight to discuss things properly." I could hear Elena's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Coaching him, probably, reminding him to use the right tone, the right phrases. "Where?" I asked. "The Harbour House, 7 o'clock. Elena made reservations. The Harbour House was the fanciest restaurant in Seabrook, the kind of place where Elena felt comfortable, and I always felt slightly out of place. Neutral territory, she'd probably call it, though I suspected she'd chosen it precisely because it wasn't neutral at all. "All right," I said. "I'll be there." After I hung up, Frankie raised an eyebrow. "Dinner?" Apparently, they want to discuss things properly now. "Let me guess Elena's idea." I nodded. "She's probably realized that locking me out and offering insulting buyout terms might have legal consequences. Are you going to tell them what Harold said?" I looked at my grandmother's recipe book again, thinking about all the family traditions Elena had systematically eliminated from the cafe. The poetry readings that brought in young artists and retirees alike. The community bulletin board where locals posted everything from guitar lessons to lost cat notices. The mismatched furniture that Elena had replaced with sleek, uncomfortable chairs that looked good in photographs but discouraged the kind of lingering conversations that had made the cafe a true community gathering place. "I'm going to listen," I said finally. "I'm going to hear what they have to say, and then I'm going to decide whether my son still exists underneath whatever Elena has turned him into." Frankie squeezed my shoulder. "And if he doesn't," I closed the recipe book and met her eyes, "then I'll do what I should have done months ago. I'll protect myself." That evening, I dressed carefully for dinner, a navy blue dress that David had always said brought out my eyes, paired with the pearl necklace he had given me for our 10th anniversary. If this was going to be a negotiation, I wanted to look like someone who commanded respect, not a discarded mother begging for scraps of her son's attention. The Harbour House was busy for a Thursday night, filled with tourists and locals celebrating special occasions. Elena had indeed made reservations at a corner table that offered privacy, but also felt somehow isolated from the warm bustle of the main dining room. They were already seated when I arrived. Elena in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, Maley in the navy blazer I'd bought him for his college graduation. They looked like a successful young couple, the kind of people who belonged in upscale restaurants and exclusive social circles. "Mom," Maley stood to kiss my cheek, and for a moment he was just my son again, genuinely glad to see me. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." I sat down across from them, noting how Elena's smile seemed painted on. "Professional rather than personal." "We ordered you a glass of Chardonnay," Elena said. "I remembered it's your favorite." "It wasn't, actually. I preferred Pinot Grigio, and had mentioned it several times over the years." But correcting her seemed petty, so I simply thanked her and took a sip of wine that was perfectly fine but not what I would have chosen. "Selena," Elena began, her tone warm but somehow rehearsed. "Maley and I want to apologize for how things went this morning. We realize we may have been unclear about our intentions. May have been unclear. As if locking me out of my own business was a communication error rather than a deliberate act of exclusion. We're not trying to push you out," Maley added quickly. "We value everything you've contributed to the cafe. We just think it's time to formalize our roles a bit more." I set down my wine glass and looked at both of them. "What does that mean?" "Exactly." Elena leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. "We'd like to offer you a consulting position. You'd receive a monthly fee for your expertise and oversight, but Maley and I would handle the day-to-day operations. It would give you the income without the stress of daily management." a consulting position, in my own business. With a monthly fee that would undoubtedly be a fraction of what my 60% ownership entitled me to in actual profits. What kind of monthly fee? I asked. Elena and Maley exchanged a quick glance. We were thinking $2,000 a month, Elena said. Plus, of course, we'd still like to discuss purchasing your ownership stake at some point in the future. $2,000 a month. $24,000 a year for a business that was generating over $100,000 annually in profit, most of which belonged to me as majority owner. I looked at my son, searching his face for some sign that he understood what they were asking me to accept. And in exchange for this consulting fee, you'd want me to step back from daily operations, Maley said. Let us handle staffing, suppliers, menu decisions. You could still visit, of course, just ... Maybe not every day, I repeated slowly. In the business I funded, that I helped design, that I've worked in every morning for 2 years, Mom, you've earned the right to relax, Maley said, and his tone was so patronizing I felt my hands clench in my lap. You don't need to be getting up at 5:30 anymore. You could sleep in, travel, enjoy your retirement. Enjoy my retirement by watching from a distance while they dismantled everything I'd built. Watch them replace my grandmother's recipes with mass-produced alternatives, eliminate the community programs that had made the cafe special, transform the warm gathering place I'd created into just another generic coffee shop. That's very generous, I said carefully. But I'll need some time to think about it, of course, Elena said quickly. Take all the time you need. We just want what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone. The phrase struck me as familiar, and I realized Maley had used almost identical words that morning in the park. They'd rehearsed this conversation, planned their talking points, decided together how to package my demotion as a generous offer. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation about the weather, the tourist season, Elena's family's upcoming visit for Labor Day. I smiled and nodded and played the role of the gracious mother accepting her adult children's wisdom about what was best for her life. But underneath the performance, I was making calculations. $2,000 a month versus 60% of a 6-figure annual profit. A consulting role versus majority ownership. Monthly scraps versus the financial security I'd earned through decades of work and sacrifice. When Maley walked me to my car, after dinner, he seemed genuinely relieved that I hadn't rejected their offer outright. I think this could work really well, Mom, he said, hugging me goodbye. Elena has some great ideas for expansion, and this way you can be involved without all the stress. I hugged him back, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne, the same brand he'd worn since college. For just a moment, I let myself remember all the times this same embrace had meant comfort and connection. Before his wife had decided I was an inconvenience to be managed. Good night, honey, I said. I'll call you in a few days. Driving home along the coast highway, with the ocean dark and endless beside me, I thought about my grandmother's recipe book sitting on my kitchen counter. Rose Hartley had been a practical woman who'd raised 5 children during the Depression and managed to keep her family fed, and her dignity intact through circumstances far more challenging than being squeezed out by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. Grandma Rose had written notes in the margins of her recipes, little reminders and variations she'd discovered over the years. One note, scrawled beside her apple pie recipe in faded blue ink, had always stuck with me. Sometimes you have to be willing to start over to get what you deserve. I was 65 years old, financially secure, and had no intention of spending my remaining years accepting scraps from the table I'd set myself. It was time to start over. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I slept until 8 o'clock. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could, that I wasn't bound by the routine of rushing to the cafe before dawn, that my value as a person wasn't tied to how early I could have the first batch of muffins ready for the fishing fleet. When I finally made it to the kitchen, I found 3 missed calls from Maley on my phone. I ignored them and made myself a proper breakfast: scrambled eggs with fresh herbs from my garden, toast with real butter, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I ate slowly, deliberately, Watching the morning light dance across the waves through my kitchen window, the fourth call came while I was finishing my second cup of coffee. "Mom, where are you?" Maley's voice was strained, slightly panicked. "Amira said you didn't come in this morning. Are you sick?" Amira was our their 19-year-old intern, a local girl who'd been working at the cafe since she turned 16. Sweet kid, studying business at the community college, with dreams of opening her own bakery someday. She'd learned most of her baking skills from me, and I'd been helping her understand the financial side of running a food service business. "I'm fine," I said calmly. "I'm just taking some time to think about your offer, but we need the morning pastries ready." The fishermen are already asking about the cinnamon rolls. The cinnamon rolls that Elena had wanted to eliminate entirely. The ones that brought customers in before 6 a.m. and often sold out before noon. The ones made from my grandmother's recipe that I'd been getting up at 5:30 to prepare every single morning for 2 years. "I'm sure Elena can handle it," I said. "She has experience with scaling businesses, after all." A pause. "Mom, Elena doesn't know how to make the pastries." "You never taught her your recipes." I offered to. I reminded him multiple times. "She said traditional baking was too time-intensive for efficient operations." Another pause. Longer. "This time, could you just come in today? We can talk about the consulting arrangement later. Right now, we have customers expecting." "No," I said quietly. "I couldn't." "What do you mean?" "You couldn't." "I mean, I no longer have keys to the building. Remember, you changed the locks yesterday." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the caller dropped. Finally, Maley spoke, his voice tight with frustration. "This is ridiculous. Mom, you're being petty." Petty, the word hung in the air like an accusation. After 40 years of putting his needs before my own, after investing my retirement savings in his dreams, after 2 years of watching Elena systematically erase my contributions, I was being petty for refusing to fix the problems they'd created by excluding me. "Perhaps," I said, "but it's my prerogative to be petty with my own business decisions. It's not just your business anymore. Mom, Elena and I have put 2 years of our lives into this place, and I put $200,000 into it, plus 2 years of 5:30 mornings and recipe development and customer relationships. But apparently my contributions are less valuable than Elena's management expertise." "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said, Maley, yesterday in the park, and again last night at dinner. Elena and I would handle the day-to-day operations. Elena has experience with scaling businesses. Elena thinks traditional baking is too time-intensive." I took a breath, steadying myself. When did Elena's opinion become more important than mine in a business I created? "She's my wife, and I'm your mother. I'm also your business partner and primary investor." "Or have you forgotten that part?" I could hear voices in the background. Elena, probably, coaching him through this conversation the same way she'd coached him through last night's dinner offer. "Look," Maley said, "can we just get through today? Come in, make the pastries, help us figure this out. We'll talk about everything else later." "No," I said again. "If you want to run the business without me, then run the business without me. But don't call me when you need my grandmother's recipes or my early morning labor. You can't have it both ways." I hung up before he could respond and turned off my phone. Then I drove to the bank. First National of Seabrook was a small-town institution where everyone knew everyone, and Martha Chen, the branch manager, had been handling my accounts for over a decade. She greeted me with genuine warmth and offered coffee while we talked in her office. "I need to review all the financial records for the cafe business," I told her. "Everything from the initial investment through current accounts." Martha's expression grew concerned. "Is everything all right, Selena? I hope there's not a problem with the business. I'm just trying to get a complete picture of the financial situation," I said diplomatically. "There may be some changes coming over the next hour." Martha printed out 2 years of statements, deposits, and transfers. The numbers told a story that was even more stark than I'd remembered. My initial investment of $187,000 had covered not just the building purchase and renovation, but also equipment, licensing, initial inventory, and 6 months of operating expenses. Maley and Elena's contributions totaled less than $15,000, and mostly Maley's labor during the renovation and Elena's design consultation, which had consisted primarily of choosing paint colors and furniture. In the 2 years since opening, the business had generated just over $300,000 in revenue, with a net profit of approximately $120,000 after all expenses. As the 60% owner, I was entitled to $72,000 of that profit. Instead, I'd been taking a modest monthly stipend of $2,000, $24,000 per year, while Maley and Elena divided the remaining profits and reinvested them in improvements that I'd had no voice in approving. These expansion plans they mentioned, I asked Martha, have they applied for any business loans? She checked her computer, then shook her head. No loan applications that I can see. But Elena did come in last week asking about requirements for a second business loan, hypothetically speaking. Of course she had. Elena was planning to fund their expansion with borrowed money, using the profitable cafe as collateral, effectively leveraging my investment to finance their growth without giving me any additional ownership or control. I left the bank with copies of every financial document and a clearer understanding of exactly how much money was at stake. Not just my original investment, but 2 years of profits that had been reinvested without my consent, plus the current value of a thriving business in a prime location. My next stop was Frankie's bookstore. The Turning Page occupied a converted Victorian house on 2nd Street, its rooms filled with carefully curated books, local art, and comfortable reading nooks that encouraged browsing. Frankie had owned it for 15 years, building it from a struggling used bookstore into a cultural hub that hosted author readings, book clubs, and wine tastings that drew visitors from throughout the region. I found her in the back office, surrounded by invoices and order forms, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she worked through her weekly inventory. She looked up when I knocked on the doorframe. "Well," she said, taking in my expression, "you look like a woman who's made a decision." I sat down in the chair across from her desk and pulled out the bank statements. "I want you to look at these numbers and tell me what you think." Frankie studied the documents with the sharp attention of someone who'd been running her own business for decades. When she finished, she set the papers down and leaned back in her chair. "Jesus, Selena. They've been stealing from you." "Not stealing. Exactly. Just managing my money without my input." "Honey, when someone takes $72,000 a year that belongs to you and spends it without your permission, that's stealing. The fact that it's your son doing it just makes it worse." I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. He probably doesn't see it that way. Elena probably convinced him that reinvesting the profits was good business practice. Elena probably convinced him that your money was their money the minute they got married. Frankie's voice was sharp with anger. "And now they want to buy you out for $50,000 for a business worth at least $500,000 in this market." Mr. Carrington said I could force a sale, put the whole operation on the market, and make them buy me out at fair value or lose the business entirely. And I looked out the window toward Harbour Street, where I could see tourists and locals walking past the cafe. Even from 2 blocks away, I could see the line of customers waiting outside, people who came specifically for the pastries I made every morning. The community atmosphere I'd helped create, the sense of belonging that had nothing to do with sleek furniture or professional management. "And I keep thinking about Amira," I said quietly. "She's worked there for 3 years. She's counting on us for a reference when she graduates, for the experience she needs to start her own place. If I force a sale to strangers, she loses her job. If you don't force a sale, you lose your business. I've already lost my business. The question now is whether I want to get fair compensation for it or let them continue stealing from me while they push me out." Frankie was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "What would David tell you to do?" The question hit harder than I'd expected. David had been gone for over 20 years, but I still found myself asking what he would think about major decisions. He'd been the practical one in our marriage, the one who could look at a situation objectively and see the best path forward. David would tell me to stop letting emotions cloud my business judgment. I said finally. He'd say that family relationships and financial partnerships are 2 different things. And I shouldn't sacrifice one to preserve the other when the other person isn't willing to do the same. Smart man, he was. He also would have told Maley exactly what he thought about how he's treating his mother. But David's not here. No, I said quietly. He's not, which means I have to decide for myself what I'm willing to accept and what I'm not. My phone buzzed with a text message. Maley, Mom, we really need to talk. Can you come by the cafe this afternoon? I showed the message to Frankie, who snorted. Let me guess they had a terrible morning without your pastries and suddenly want to negotiate. Probably. Are you going to go? I thought about Amira, probably struggling to explain to disappointed customers why there were no cinnamon rolls. This morning, I thought about the fishermen who'd been stopping by for 2 years, counting on their usual breakfast before heading out on the water. I thought about all the regular customers who'd become friends, who trusted me to be there every morning with fresh coffee and homemade pastries and a warm smile. Then I thought about Elena's clinical language about boundaries and professional management, about Maley's patronizing suggestion that I deserved to sleep in and enjoy my retirement, about the locks being changed without a conversation, the $50,000 insult disguised as a generous offer, the assumption that I would accept whatever scraps they were willing to throw me. No, I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. I'm not going to go running back because they need me to fix their problems. If they want to run the business without me, they can figure out how to run the business without me, I texted. Back, I'm still considering your offer. I'll call you when I've made a decision. Frankie grinned. Good for you. Let them sweat for a while. Is that terrible? They're probably dealing with angry customers and disappointed staff. Selena, honey, they locked you out of your own business yesterday. Today they're discovering that actions have consequences. That's not terrible, that's education. I spent the rest of the afternoon in Frankie's bookstore, helping her reorganize the local authors section and trying not to think about what was happening at the cafe. But by evening, the guilt was eating at me. Not guilt about standing up for myself, but guilt about the innocent people, employees and customers who were caught in the middle of this family drama. Around 6 o'clock, as I was getting ready to head home, Amira appeared in the bookstore doorway. She looked exhausted, her usual bright energy dampened by stress. Mrs. Doughty, she said tentatively. Could I talk to you for a minute? I followed her outside, where we sat on the bench in front of the bookstore. Amira twisted her hands in her lap, clearly struggling with whatever she wanted to say. I don't know what's going on between you and Maley, she began, but I wanted you to know that today was really hard. We had to turn away half our morning customers because we didn't have any pastries ready. Elena tried to make some of the basic stuff, but she doesn't know the recipes, and what she made was and single quotes t. Well, it wasn't very good. I felt a pang of sympathy for the girl and for all the customers who'd been disappointed. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Amira, I know it's not fair to you. Mrs. Doughty, I don't know what happened, but I hope you can work it out. The cafe isn't the same without you. It's not just the baking, it's the way you make everyone feel welcome. Elena is nice and all, but she does and single quotes t. She doesn't know people's names. She doesn't ask about their families or remember what they like to order. She treats customers like transactions instead of neighbors. The observation was so perceptive, so precisely articulated, that I found myself looking at Amira with new respect. At 19, she understood something about business that Elena, with all her professional experience, seemed to have missed entirely, though. CAF was supposed to be a community gathering place, I said. That was always the vision. It was. It is. But without you the ... double quotes, Amira shrugged sadly. It just feels like any other coffee shop. After Amira left, I sat on the bench for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The tourist season was winding down, but there were still couples walking hand in hand along Harbour Street, families finishing ice cream cones, locals greeting each other as they headed home from work. This was my community. These were my neighbours. I'd helped create a place where they could gather, connect, feel at home. And now I was being asked to step aside so Elena could transform it into something more efficient, more professional, more profitable. But more profitable for whom? And at what cost? My phone rang. Maley again. Mom, please, we need to talk. Today was a disaster, and I think we all said things we didn't mean. Can you come to dinner tomorrow night? Just family, no business talk, just family. The phrase would have meant something different a week ago. Now it felt like another negotiation tactic, another way to manipulate my maternal instincts to get what they wanted. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. But I'd already thought about it. And I'd made my decision, telling and preparing. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tomorrow, I was going to call Mr. Carrington and ask him to prepare the papers to force a sale of the business. Not because I wanted to hurt my son, but because I finally understood that I couldn't save him from the consequences of his choices. And maybe, just maybe, losing the business would teach him something about the value of loyalty that 2 years of profits couldn't. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, deadheading the late summer roses and trying to lose myself in the meditative rhythm of pruning, when I heard footsteps on my front walkway. Elena stood at my garden gate, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse, the most casual I'd ever seen her, and her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Selena, could we talk? I set down my pruning shears and gestured toward the small patio table where I'd been having my morning coffee. Of course. Would you like some tea? That would be nice. Thank you. I went inside to put the kettle on. My mind racing. In 2 years of marriage to my son, Elena had never once visited me alone. We'd had plenty of interactions, family dinners, holiday celebrations, business meetings, but always with Maley present, always with the safety net of his presence to mediate between us. When I returned with 2 cups of chamomile tea, Elena was sitting stiffly in the rattan chair, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl waiting to be disciplined. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. Actually, I owe you several apologies, but I'm not sure where to start. I sat down across from her, surprised by the admission. Why don't you start wherever feels right? She took a shaky breath. I've been wrong about you, about us, about the whole situation. Really, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, lacking the confident authority she usually projected. Yesterday was a wake-up call. Watching Maley panic because he didn't know how to make your grandmother's cinnamon rolls, seeing customers leave disappointed, realizing that we'd locked you out of something that was really yours to begin with. Elena, please, let me finish. I need to say this. She looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. I've been jealous of you since the day I met Maley, not of your relationship with him, exactly, but of your presence in his life, your influence, the way he talked about you with so much respect and admiration. The confession surprised me. Why would that make you jealous? Because I've never had that kind of relationship with my own mother. She is difficult, critical. Nothing I do is ever good enough, successful enough, impressive enough. When I met Maley and saw how much he valued your opinion, how proud he was of your business partnership, I felt threatened by it. Elena's hand shook slightly as she lifted her teacup. My mother always told me that marriage means putting your spouse first, above everyone else, including parents. She said that letting in-laws have too much influence was a recipe for divorce. So I convinced myself that creating distance between you and Maley was protecting our marriage. I thought about all the subtle ways Elena had worked to minimize my presence over the past 2 years, suggesting family dinners at restaurants instead of my home, scheduling business meetings when she knew I had other commitments, gradually taking over responsibilities that had originally been mine. But it wasn't about protecting your marriage, I said gently. It was about control, she nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I wanted to be the most important woman in his life. I wanted to prove that I could run the business better than a woman who funded it with her retirement savings and built it from scratch. The honesty was painful to hear, but I appreciated it more than any diplomatic half-truth would have been. Elena, I never wanted to compete with you for Maley's affection. I just wanted to be included in the life I'd helped create. I know that now. Yesterday, when everything fell apart, I realized that I hadn't been protecting our marriage. I'd Been sabotaging the business and hurting someone who'd only ever been generous to me. We sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun warming the patio, and the distant sound of waves providing a peaceful backdrop to this unexpected conversation. There's something else, Elena said finally. Something you need to know about the business finances. My stomach tightened. What about them? The expansion plans I've been pushing, they weren't just about growth. My family has been pressuring me to get more involved in serious business ventures ever since the wedding. They think the cafe is charming but small time, and they've been offering to invest in expansion as a way to legitimize it, I guess. Legitimize it how? Elena's face reddened. They want to franchise the concept, turn it into a chain. They think we could have 5 or 6 locations within 3 years if we standardize everything: the menu, the decor, the operations. No more local art, no more poetry readings, no more handwritten daily specials, just a replicable business model that could scale regionally. The vision made my blood run cold. Everything unique and special about the cafe stripped away in favor of efficiency and profit. My grandmother's recipes replaced with mass-produced alternatives. The community gathering place I'd created transformed into just another corporate coffee chain, and Maley agreed to this. He doesn't know about it yet. I was planning to present it as a surprise, a way to take the business to the next level. My father has connections with commercial real estate developers, and my brother works in franchise consulting. They've already done preliminary market research without consulting me, without consulting anyone except my family. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I convinced myself that since you wanted to step back anyway, this would be perfect timing. We could buy out your share, bring in my family's investment, and build something bigger. I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at the audacity of planning my business's future without me. Relief that the plan had been derailed before it could be implemented. Elena, that cafe represents 30 years of my life. My memories of David, my grandmother's legacy, the community I chose to call home. You were planning to turn it into a corporate franchise. I was planning to turn it into something successful, she said defensively, then caught herself. I'm sorry, that came out wrong. What I mean is, I was so focused on growth and profit that I lost sight of what made the place worth preserving in the first place. And what changed your mind? Elena smiled sadly, watching Maley yesterday. He was so lost without you there. Not just because he couldn't make the pastries, but because he realized he'd hurt the person who'd made his dreams possible. He spent all day yesterday calling you, texting you, asking customers if they'd seen you. He was miserable. He was manipulating me, I said quietly. Trying to guilt me into coming back to fix the problems you'd created by excluding me, maybe partly. But mostly he was scared. Scared that he'd lost his mother over a business deal. Scared that I'd pushed him into destroying the most important relationship in his life. I studied Elena's face, looking for signs of the calculated manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, I saw genuine remorse and something that looked like fear. What are you asking me, Elena? I'm asking if there's a way to fix this. Not just the business arrangement, but the relationship. All of it. She leaned forward slightly. I'm asking if you'd be willing to give me a chance to learn from you instead of competing with you. What does that look like practically? I don't know yet. Maybe we could restructure the partnership to reflect your actual investment and ownership. Maybe I could step back from trying to modernize everything and focus on learning why the cafe works the way it does. Maybe we could find a way to honor what you've built while still allowing for thoughtful growth. It was more than I'd expected from Elena, but also less than I needed to feel secure about my position in the business. Elena, I appreciate your honesty. I really do. But words are easy. What I need to see is action, acknowledgement of my legal ownership, restoration of my operational role, and a voice in any future decisions that affect the business I created. Done, she said immediately. Whatever Mr. Carrington says you're entitled to, we'll honor. No arguments, no negotiations. I raised an eyebrow. You might want to discuss that with Maley before making promises. We talked about it last night. For hours. He knows he screwed up, Selena. He knows he let me push him into treating you unfairly, and he's ready to make it right. And your family's franchise plans, dead. completely off the table. I'm going to call my father this afternoon and tell him we're not interested in outside investment. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. Not trust that would take time to rebuild, but the possibility that this situation might be salvageable. There's one more thing, Elena said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a set of keys. Your keys to the cafe. I made copies yesterday after I realized how stupid it was to lock you out of your own business. I took the keys, feeling their familiar weight in my palm. Such small objects to carry so much symbolic meaning. Thank you, I said, but I need you to understand something. I'm not just a silent investor anymore. I'm not just Maley's mother who helped out in the early days. I'm a business owner who's been systematically excluded from her own operation. And that can happen again. It won't, Elena said firmly. I promise you, it won't. After Elena left, I called Mr. Carrington and asked him to postpone preparing the sale documents. I wanted to see if this apparent change of heart was genuine or just another manipulation tactic designed to keep me from exercising my legal rights. Are you sure, my dear? He asked. People often say what they think you want to hear when they're facing consequences. I know, but I need to give them a chance to prove they mean it. If they don't, I can always move forward with the sale later. Indeed you can. Just remember, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I finished. I understand, Harold, but sometimes family deserves a second chance. Sometimes, he agreed. Just make sure they deserve it before you give it to them. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 3 days. I drove to the cafe. Not to work, not to fix their problems, but to see for myself what the business looked like without my daily presence. The exterior looked the same, the cheerful blue awning, the flower boxes I planted along the front windows, the hand-painted sign that Maley and I had commissioned from a local artist. But something felt different as I approached the front door. Through the windows, I could see customers at the mismatched tables I'd chosen, but the atmosphere seemed subdued somehow. Less laughter, less lingering conversation. Elena was behind the counter, efficiently taking orders and making coffee, but she moved with the brisk professionalism of someone completing transactions rather than the warm hospitality of someone welcoming neighbors. Maley emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of what looked like store-bought pastries, generic croissants and muffins that probably came from a wholesale supplier. The customers took them politely, but I could see disappointment in their faces. These weren't the handmade specialties they'd come to expect. I stood outside for several minutes, watching my son struggle to replace something he'd never fully appreciated. The cafe was functioning, technically. Orders were being taken, coffee was being served, money was changing hands. But the soul of the place, the warmth, the community connection, the sense of belonging was missing. As I turned to leave, Amira spotted me through the window and waved. Her face lit up with relief, and she mouthed the words, "Thank goodness," before hurrying back to help a customer. The girl's reaction reminded me that this wasn't just about my relationship with Maley and Elena. Other people depended on the cafe, to employees who needed their jobs, customers who'd made it part of their daily routine, community members who'd found a gathering place they couldn't easily replace. Driving home, I thought about Elena's apology and her promise to make things right. I wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that we could find a way forward that honored both my investment and her marriage to my son. But I also knew that real change would require more than one honest conversation and a set of return keys. It would require Elena to prove that she could share space with me rather than compete with me. It would require Maley to stand up for our partnership even when it created tension in his marriage. And it would require me to find a way to protect my interests without destroying the family relationships I'd spent 40 years building. The next few weeks would tell me whether any of that was possible, or whether I'd have to choose between my financial security and my son's forgiveness. Either way, I was done being pushed aside. The woman who'd built a business from nothing wasn't going to let anyone, family or otherwise, steal her life's work without a fight. The following Monday morning, I arrived at the cafe at exactly 6 a.m. not to work, but to observe. I wanted to see how Maley and Elena handled the morning rush now that they'd had a weekend to reorganize without me. I also wanted to see if Elena's promises about change would translate into actual behaviour. I parked across the street and watched through the large front windows as Elena struggled with the espresso machine while Maley emerged from the kitchen with another tray of store-bought pastries. The morning fishing fleet was already lined up outside, but instead of the easy camaraderie I was used to seeing, there was tension in the air. Customers were checking their watches, shifting impatiently, clearly frustrated by the slow service. Captain Martinez, one of our regulars who'd been coming in since our opening week, finally gave up and left without ordering. Through my car window, I could see him shaking his head as he walked past the cafe toward his truck. 3 other customers followed his lead within the next 10 minutes. At 6:15, my phone rang. Maley's name on the screen. "Mom, I know you're probably still thinking about everything, but we really need your help this morning. Elena's trying, but she can't keep up with the espresso orders, and I burnt 2 batches of breakfast pastries." "Could you please?" "No," I said calmly. "You wanted to run the business without me, so run the business without me. But people are leaving." "Where?" "Losing customers. Then you'd better figure out how to serve them properly." I hung up and continued watching. Over the next hour, I saw Maley make 3 more trips to the kitchen, each time returning with increasingly desperate attempts at breakfast items. Elena had mastered the basic coffee hors d'oeuvres, but the specialty drinks that required steamed milk and precise timing were clearly beyond her skill level. By 7:30, the morning rush was essentially over, and they'd served maybe half their usual number of customers. I could see Elena slumped against the counter, exhausted and clearly frustrated. Maley was pacing behind the register, running his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood. Whenever he was overwhelmed, I started my car and drove home, feeling both satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because they were finally experiencing the consequences of their decision to exclude me. Sadness because I was watching something I'd built with love slowly self-destruct. At home, I found Frankie waiting on my porch with a thermos of coffee and a grim expression. "I drove by the café this morning," she said without preamble. "Looked like a disaster." It was. "How do you feel about that?" I considered the question while I unlocked my front door. Vindicated and heartbroken. Is it possible to feel both things at the same time? Honey, that's called being human. The question is, what are you going to do about it? We settled in my living room with our coffee, and I told Frankie about Elena's visit and apology. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Do you believe her?" she asked finally. "I want to, but believing someone and trusting them are 2 different things." Smart woman. "What would it take for you to trust her again?" I thought about the question for the rest of the morning. Trust wasn't just about apologies and promises, it was about consistent actions over time. Elena could say all the right things, but until she proved she could share control rather than seize it, I had no reason to believe anything would really change. Around noon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Mr. Carrington. "Harold, I want you to draw up those sale papers after all. I thought you decided to give them another chance." "I have, but I want them to understand exactly what they stand to lose if they can't follow through on their promises." Mr. Carrington chuckled. The velvet hammer approach. Very effective in business negotiations. "This isn't a negotiation, Harold. It's a reality check. They need to see what happens if I exercise my legal rights instead of relying on their good intentions." "When would you like to present them with the papers?" "Tomorrow. I want them to have a few more days of struggling on their own, and then I want them to see exactly what their choices are." The next 2 days passed slowly. I resisted the urge to drive by the cafe, though Frankie provided regular updates from her network of local sources. The reports weren't encouraging. Customers were complaining about slow service and inferior pastries. Several regulars had started driving to the Starbucks 20 miles away in the next town, and word was spreading that something was wrong. At Seabrook Coffee Company. Tuesday evening, Elena called. "Selena, I know you said you needed time to think, but I'm worried about the business. We're losing customers every day, and I don't know how to fix it." "What specifically is going wrong?" "Everything. I can't make your grandmother's recipes because I never learned them properly. The espresso machine keeps malfunctioning because I don't know how to maintain it. The morning regulars are frustrated because we can't serve them quickly enough. And Maley's ... double quotes, she paused. Maley is barely speaking to me. He blames me for ruining his relationship with you. Do you think that's fair or completely fair? This is my fault, Selena. I pushed for changes that weren't necessary. I convinced him to exclude you from decisions you had every right to make. And now we're both realizing that we don't actually know how to run this business without you. The admission was more honest than I'd expected. But I could also hear the manipulation underneath it, the appeal to my maternal instincts, the suggestion that helping them would also heal my relationship with Maley. Elena, I appreciate your honesty, but apologizing for mistakes and learning from them are two different things. What do you mean? I mean that saying you were wrong is easy. Proving you can do better is hard. And right now, I have no evidence that anything would be different if I came back. What kind of evidence would you need? It was the right question, and I realized I had an answer ready. Legal documentation of my ownership percentage, written. Agreements about my role in operations and decision-making. And a clear understanding that any future changes require my consent as majority owner. Done. Whatever you want in writing, we'll sign it. That's what you said last week about honoring my legal rights. Words are easy. Elena, I need to see action. Wednesday morning, Mr. Carrington called to tell me the sale documents were ready. I drove to his office that afternoon to review them, feeling a mixture of determination and dread. These papers give you 3 options, he explained, spreading the documents across his desk. Option 1, force an immediate sale to external buyers, with proceeds divided according to ownership percentages. Option 2, require them to buy you out at fair market value within 30 days. Option 3, dissolve the partnership and liquidate all business assets. What's the fair market value? Based on current revenue and the prime location, I'd estimate between $400,000 and $500,000. Your 60% share would be worth approximately $250,000 to $300,000, 5 times what they'd offered me. The number was staggering, even though I'd known intellectually that the business was worth far more than their insulting $50,000 proposal. And if they can't afford to buy me out, then the business goes on the market, and they lose everything except their initial investment. I took the papers home and spent the evening reading through every clause, every condition, every legal protection Mr. Carrington had included. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Thursday. At 10 a.m., I walked into the café carrying a manila envelope. The morning rush was long over, and only a few customers remained at tables, most of them looking dissatisfied with their store-bought pastries and lukewarm coffee. Maley and Elena were behind the counter, both looking exhausted and defeated. When they saw me enter, hope flickered across their faces, the same expression they'd probably worn as children on Christmas morning. "Mom," Maley said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God, we've been and we need to talk," I interrupted. All 3 of us, privately, Elena quickly asked Amira to watch the front counter while we moved to the small office in the back of the caf. The space felt different, now cluttered with Elena's attempts at organization, missing the personal touches that had made it feel like home. I sat down across from them and placed the manila envelope on the desk between us. "These are legal documents prepared by Mr. Carrington," I said calmly. "They outline my options as majority owner of this business." Maley's face went pale. "Mom, what are you? I'm giving you a choice," I continued. "You can buy me out at fair market value, approximately $300,000 within 30 days, or the business goes on the market to external buyers, and you lose everything." Elena's hand shook as she opened the envelope and began reading. $300,000. "But we don't have that kind of money, I know." "Which means you'll probably lose the business entirely." Maley stared at me in shock. "You'd really do this? You'd destroy everything we've built?" "Everything I've built," I corrected, "with my money, my recipes, my labor, and my vision. You've spent the past month trying to steal it from me. Now you get to see what happens when you push someone too far. This is blackmail," Elena said, her voice rising. "No, this is business. The same kind of business decision you made when you changed the locks and offered me $50,000 for a Business worth $500,000. Tears started flowing down Elena's cheeks. Selena, please. I know I made mistakes, but this would destroy Maley's dream. Everything he's worked for with my money, I said quietly. Money that you convinced him he could take away from me whenever it became convenient. Maley stood up abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out on the alley behind the building. So this is it. This is how you want our relationship to end. With lawyers and ultimatums, our relationship ended when you chose your wife's comfort over your mother's dignity. This is just the financial paperwork. The words hit him like a physical blow, and I saw his shoulders slump with the weight of recognition. For the first time in months, he seemed to truly understand what he'd done. What if ... double quotes he began, then stopped, struggling to find words. What if we could find another way, some kind of compromise that protects your investment but doesn't destroy the business? I'm listening. Elena wiped her eyes and looked at me directly. What if we restructured everything from scratch? Give you full legal control as majority owner, document your role in all operations, and put every major decision up for vote according to ownership percentages. What if Elena stepped back entirely? Maley added quietly, what if it went back to being a partnership between you and me, the way it was supposed to be? I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. I could see the boy I'd raised underneath the man who'd hurt me, could see genuine remorse beginning to replace the defensive anger, and Elena would be willing to give up her role in the business entirely. Elena nodded slowly. If that's what it takes to save Maley's dream and repair the damage I've caused, that's very noble, I said. But it doesn't solve the fundamental problem, which is. I stood up and walked to the window where Maley was standing, looking out at the alley where we used to unload supply deliveries together in the early days. The fundamental problem is trust, I said. You've shown me that when pressured to choose between my interests and Elena's preferences, you'll choose Elena every time. Even when I'm legally entitled to protection, even when I've invested my life savings, even when I'm your mother. Maley turned to face me, and I could see tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please don't take away everything we've built together. We didn't build it together, Maley. I built it. And then I invited you to help me run it. There's a difference. The truth hung in the air between us like a bridge we'd both have to choose to cross or burn forever. So what happens now? Elena asked quietly. I picked up the legal documents and tucked them back into the envelope. Now you have 30 days to come up with $300,000, or I put the business on the market, and if we can't, then you learn what it feels like to lose everything you thought was yours. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final comment. For what it's worth, Elena, I do believe you're genuinely sorry. And Maley, I know you love me and never intended to hurt me this badly. But love without respect is just manipulation, and I'm too old to accept that from anyone. I left them sitting in the office with the legal documents and walked out through the café I'd created, past the customers who'd become like family, past the espresso machine I'd learned to operate, and the display case that should have been filled with my grandmother's recipes. Outside, the autumn sun was bright and warm, and I could smell the salt air from the ocean just a few blocks away. For the first time in weeks, I felt clear about what came next. I was going home to wait for their decision, and to prepare for the possibility that I might have to rebuild my life without my son in it. The call came at 11 p.m. on the 29th day. I was sitting in my living room, reading by lamplight and listening to the rain against my windows, when my phone rang. Maley's name on the screen. Mom, his voice was hoarse, exhausted. We need to talk, tonight. It's almost midnight, Maley. I know, but tomorrow is the deadline, and I can't sleep. I can't eat. I haven't been able to think straight for weeks. A pause. Please, one last conversation before ... before whatever happens next. I looked out at the storm, watching lightning illuminate the choppy waters of the Pacific. The past month had been the longest of my life, 30 days of waiting while Maley and Elena scrambled to find financing. Reached out to banks, called Elena's family, explored every possible option to raise the money they needed to buy me out. From what I'd heard through Frankie's network of local sources, They'd come close twice. Elena's father had initially offered to loan them the money, then changed his mind when he learned about my legal position and the circumstances that have led to this crisis. A regional bank had pre-approved them for a business loan, then pulled the offer after reviewing the cafe's recent financial performance and realizing how badly customer satisfaction had declined. "Where do you want to meet?" I asked. "The cafe." "I know it's late, but I need to be there. I need to. I need to say goodbye to it properly." Something in his tone made my chest tighten. "Maley, are you all right?" "No, Mom, I'm not all right. I haven't been all right since I hurt the most important person in my life to please someone who I'm starting to realize never really loved me." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" Just ... Please come. Please give me one more chance to explain before you hate me forever." I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness for several minutes, listening to the storm and trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to face. Then I put on my raincoat and drove through the empty streets to Harbour Street. The cafe was dark except for a single light in the back office. I used my keys, the ones Elena had returned, to let myself in through the front door. The familiar scent of coffee and vanilla hit me immediately, but something felt different about the space, sadder, like a home that knows its family is moving away. I found Maley sitting at our corner table, the one where we'd made so many business decisions in the early days, where we'd celebrated our first profitable month, where I taught him to read financial statements, and he'd shared his dreams for expanding our community programs. He looked terrible. Thinner than I'd seen him since college, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble that suggested he hadn't been taking care of himself. When he saw me, he stood up with the careful movements of someone who'd aged years in a matter of weeks. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. I sat down across from him, noting the manila folder on the table between us. "Is that your answer?" In a way, he pushed the folder toward me. "But I need you to understand what happened first. I need you to know why Elena left." Elena left. Maley's laugh was bitter. 3 days ago. Packed her bags and moved back to Portland, said she couldn't watch me destroy myself over a family business that was never going to make us rich anyway. I felt a confusing mixture of emotion, sadness for my son's pain, relief that Elena was no longer a factor in our relationship, and anger at her cruelty in abandoning him when things got difficult. "I'm sorry, Maley. I know you loved her. Did I? Or did I love the idea of her? The successful, sophisticated woman who made me feel like I was finally adult enough to deserve someone like that." He shook his head. "I've had a lot of time to think over the past month, Mum, about our marriage, about the business, about what I did to you. And what did you conclude? That I'm an idiot who almost destroyed the most important relationship in his life because he was too weak to stand up to his wife's manipulation." The honesty was startling, but I could see how much it was costing him to admit it. "Elena didn't force you to exclude me from the business, Maley. You made that choice. You're right. She planted the seeds, but I chose to water them. I chose to believe that pushing you out was somehow better for our marriage than standing up for our partnership." He met my eyes directly. "I chose to forget that you sacrificed everything to give me the chance to build something meaningful. Why?" The question hung in the air between us. It was the one I'd been asking myself for weeks. Why had my son, whom I'd raised to value loyalty and integrity, chosen to betray both principles when it mattered most? Because Elena made me feel like I was finally successful on my own terms. Like I'd achieved something independent of my mother's help. He winced at his own words. How pathetic is that? A 40-year-old man who was so insecure about his accomplishments that he convinced himself he'd built this place without your money, your recipes, your labor, your connections in the community. And now I realize that there's no shame in building something with help from people who love you. That success shared with family is better than success achieved by betraying them." He gestured around the empty cafe. "And that none of it means anything if you have to hurt your mother to keep it." I reached across the table and opened the manila folder. Inside were the keys to the cafe, the deed to the building, and a letter of resignation from all business operations, signed by both Maley and Elena. "You're giving me the entire business?" I asked, stunned. "I'm giving you back what was always yours. We couldn't raise the money for the buyout, and I realized I didn't want it anyway. This place was your dream that you shared with me, not my dream that you funded. You should be the one to decide what happens to it. I stared at the documents, trying to process what this meant. Complete ownership of a business worth $500,000, but also the end of the partnership I'd envisioned when we first walked through this empty space 3 years ago. What will you do? Maley shrugged, a gesture that reminded me painfully of his teenage years. Figure it out, I guess. Elena left me the car and half our savings account, which is enough to get me started somewhere new. Maybe I'll go back to marketing or find something completely different. You could stay and work for me. The offer surprised both of us. I hadn't planned to say it, but now that the words were out, I realized I meant them. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. I've proven I can't be trusted with something this important to you. You've proven you made mistakes. That's different than being fundamentally untrustworthy. He looked around the cafe, taking in the mismatched furniture I'd chosen, the local art Elena had wanted to replace, the hand-painted menu board where we'd written daily specials together for 2 years. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly. Probably not. But you might deserve a chance to earn it back. We sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the rain against the windows and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. Finally, Maley spoke again. There's something else you need to know. About the recipes. What about them? I wrote them all down. Every single one of your grandmother's recipes that we used in the cafe, plus the variations you developed, plus the techniques you taught me for working with the equipment, everything. He pulled out a handwritten notebook, my grandmother's original recipe book, but also a newer composition notebook filled with Maley's careful handwriting. I spent the last 3 weeks recreating everything from memory, testing each recipe until I got it exactly right. I wanted to make sure you wouldn't lose any of the family traditions if something happened to me. The gesture moved me more than I'd expected. In all the drama of ownership and legal documents and financial negotiations, I'd almost forgotten about the intangible heritage that made the cafe special. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you know. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. All right. Do you think there's any chance you could ever trust me again? Not right away, but eventually. I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in months. I could see the man David and I had raised underneath the mistakes and poor decisions of the past year. I could see genuine remorse, hard-won wisdom, and something that looked like the integrity I thought was lost forever. I think trust is something that gets rebuilt over time through consistent actions, I said carefully. I think forgiveness is possible, but it has to be earned, not expected. And if I stayed in Seabrook, if I took whatever job I could find and tried to prove that I've learned from this, then we'd find out whether my son is still in there somewhere, or whether Elena changed you permanently. Maley smiled for the first time since I'd arrived, a real smile that reached his eyes. He's still in here, Mom. It just took losing everything to find him again. I stood up and walked to the espresso machine, running my hand along its familiar surface. This machine and I had become partners over the past 2 years, creating hundreds of perfect cappuccinos and lattes for customers who'd become friends. Tomorrow, I'd be operating it alone. There's one condition if you want to stay, I said without turning around. Anything. You work for me. Not with me, for me. You take direction without argument. You follow my decisions without question, and you accept that I own this place completely. No partnership, no shared authority, no input on major decisions. For how long? I turned to face him. Until I decide you've earned the right to be my partner again. Could be 6 months, could be 6 years, could be never. That's fair, he said immediately. More than fair. And you accept that I might sell this place tomorrow if I decide running it alone isn't what I want. It's your business. Mom, you can do whatever you want with it. I walked back to the table and picked up the keys, so many keys for such a small operation. Building keys, office keys, storage room keys, register keys. Each one representing a different aspect of the business I'd built and nearly lost. All right, I said. You can stay, but we start over completely. New rules, new understanding, new relationship, new relationship. You're not my son when we're working together. You're my employee. My son is the person who comes to Sunday dinner and calls me on my birthday. My employee is the person who opens this place at 5:30 in the morning and follows my instructions. Without question, Maley nodded solemnly. I understand, and Elena is never allowed back in this building. Not as a customer, not as a visitor, not for any reason. She won't want to come back. She made it clear that she thinks small-town businesses are beneath her ambitions. Good, then we understand each other. I gathered up the legal documents and walked toward the front door, then turned back one more time. Maley? Yes, tomorrow morning, 5:30. We're going to make my grandmother's cinnamon rolls, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you, exactly how I tell you to do it. Yes, Mum. And if you ever prioritize someone else's comfort over my dignity again, I will destroy you financially and personally. Are we clear? Crystal clear. I left him sitting in the café that was now entirely mine, driving home through the storm with a feeling I couldn't quite identify. Not happiness, exactly, but something like resolution. The crisis was over, the decisions were made, and tomorrow I would begin the process of rebuilding both a business and a relationship. At home, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and looked at the legal documents that made me sole owner of Seabrook Coffee Company. 6 months ago, I'd been a silent partner in my own business, gradually being pushed aside by people who thought they could run it better without me. Now I owned everything: the building, the equipment, the recipes, the customer relationships, the community connections I'd spent 2 years building. And I'd gotten it back not through lawyers or ultimatums, but by being willing to walk away from it entirely. Sometimes the only way to save something is to be prepared to lose it. The storm was beginning to clear, and I could see stars appearing. Between the clouds, tomorrow would be a new beginning, and for the first time in months, I was looking forward to it. 6 months later, I stood behind the counter of Seabrook Coffee Company at 5 in the morning, watching my son put the finishing touches on a batch of my grandmother's cinnamon rolls. His technique had improved dramatically since that first morning when I'd made him start over 3 times because the dough wasn't rolled evenly enough. Temperature, I asked, not looking up from the espresso machine I was calibrating. 350, 12 minutes, then rotate and check for golden brown, he recited. And if Mrs. Patterson asks for her usual large coffee, 2 sugars, 1 cream, heated to exactly 160 degrees, with a blueberry scone if we have them, plain if we don't. I nodded approvingly. Maley had spent the past 6 months not just realigning how to run the cafe, but learning all the details I'd never shared with him during our original partnership: the way Mr. Davidson liked his cappuccino slightly cooler than standard because of sensitive teeth. How the fishing crews needed their orders ready in exactly 8 minutes to make their tight schedule, which customers were dealing with financial hardships and might appreciate an accidentally oversized pastry portion. The cafe felt different now, and not just because Elena's modern touches had been systematically replaced with the community-focused elements she'd eliminated. There was an energy to the place that hadn't existed even in the early days, a sense of purpose and belonging that came from everyone understanding their role clearly. Amira had been promoted to assistant manager, and she'd thrown herself into learning every aspect of the operation with an enthusiasm that reminded me of myself at her age. She'd also started developing her own variations on my grandmother's recipes, with my permission and guidance, creating seasonal specialties that had customers planning their visits around what new creation might be available. Mrs. Doughty. Amira's voice came from the kitchen, where she was preparing the day's soup special. The food critic from Portland Coast magazine is here for her 10 o'clock appointment. I glanced at the clock. It was only 5:45, but I could see a professional-looking woman at one of our corner tables, making notes in a leather portfolio, while she sipped what appeared to be our signature rosehip tea, early bird. I murmured to Maley, who was transferring the cinnamon rolls to the display case with practiced efficiency, should I go talk to her? No, let her observe the natural rhythm of the morning. If she wants to interview anyone, she can wait until after the fishing fleet rush. This had become one of our unspoken rules. The cafe operated according to our community's needs first, external pressure second. We turned down 3 requests for catering events that would have been profitable, but would have required closing during hours when our regulars depended on us. We refused to participate in a regional coffee trail promotion because it would have meant standardizing our offerings to match the other participating shops. Instead, we'd focused on deepening our roots in Seabrook. Thursday poetry readings had returned, along with a Friday night acoustic music series that showcased local talent. The community bulletin board was fuller than ever, and we'd started hosting a monthly business breakfast where local entrepreneurs could network and share resources. The morning rush unfolded with the precision of a choreographed dance. Maley handled the register and most coffee orders while I managed the espresso machine and complex specialty drinks. Amira restocked pastries and managed the kitchen prep for lunch items. We moved around each other efficiently, anticipating needs and covering gaps without discussion. Captain Martinez arrived at exactly 6:15, as he had every morning for the past 3 years. Morning, Selena, the usual for me and the crew. How many today? 6, and throw in an extra Danish for Rodriguez, it's his birthday. I rang up his order while Maley assembled the pastries and Amira prepared 6 large coffees in insulated travel cups. The entire transaction took less than 3 minutes, and Martinez was heading out the door with everything his crew needed for a 10-hour fishing trip. By 7:30, the morning rush was winding down, and I could see the food critic watching our operation with obvious interest. She'd ordered one of Amira's experimental lavender honey scones and seemed to be savoring every bite while making detailed notes. During the mid-morning lull, I finally approached her table. I'm Selena Doherty, the owner. I understand you are here to write about us. She introduced herself as Patricia Wells from Portland Coast magazine and explained that the cafe had been recommended by several readers who described it as the heart of the Seabrook community. What makes this place special? She asked, pulling out a digital recorder. I thought about the question while I prepared fresh tea for both of us. 6 months ago, I might have talked about our handmade pastries or locally sourced ingredients. Today, the answer was more complex. We exist to serve our community first, I said finally. Everything else, profit, recognition, expansion comes second to that mission. That's unusual in today's restaurant industry. Most restaurants think of customers as transactions. We think of them as neighbors. There's a difference. Over the next hour, I found myself telling Patricia about the cafe's evolution, not just the business story, but the community story. How Mr. Yamamoto, a retired librarian, had started leaving Japanese poetry books on our community shelf and now hosted an informal translation group every Wednesday afternoon. How the Thursday poetry readings had helped 3 local high school students overcome stage fright and discover their voices as performers. How a Pay It Forward board had become a discreet way for community members to help each other through financial difficulties. And your son works for you now? Patricia asked, glancing toward Maley, who was restocking coffee beans while clearly trying not to eavesdrop. He does. It's been ... an adjustment for both of us. Was it difficult to restructure a family business? Relationship. I considered how to answer honestly without sharing more than was appropriate for publication. Family businesses are complicated because you're balancing personal relationships with professional responsibilities. Sometimes you have to be willing to prioritize the business over family harmony to protect what you've built. And that's what you did. I protected what I'd built. The family relationships are still being rebuilt after Patricia left, promising to send me a copy of the article before publication. I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that terrible morning when I discovered the locks had been changed. Not just in my relationship with Maley, but in my understanding of my own strength and worth. The afternoon brought a steady stream of regulars and tourists, along with a couple of interesting developments. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that her grandson was graduating from culinary school and wondered if he might be interested in a part-time baker. The mayor stopped by to discuss the cafe hosting a booth at the upcoming Harvest Festival and to ask if I'd considered joining the Downtown Revitalization Committee. Both requests would have required consultation with Maley during our original partnership. Now, as sole owner, I could make decisions quickly and confidently. Yes to the potential baker, pending a trial period. Yes to the festival booth, but only if we could focus on community engagement rather than just sales. Maybe to the committee, depending on the time commitment and whether my input would actually be valued. Around 3 o'clock, Frankie arrived for our weekly business consultation, an arrangement we'd started when I'd taken full control of the café and needed someone to bounce ideas off of who understood both business operations and local politics. "How did the interview go?" she asked, settling into a usual corner table with her customary glass of wine. "Better than expected." She seemed genuinely interested in the community aspect rather than just the food. "Good, we need more stories about businesses that prioritize people over profit." Frankie glanced around the cafe, taking in the relaxed afternoon atmosphere. "Speaking of which, how are things with Maley?" I looked toward the kitchen, where my son was preparing vegetables for tomorrow's soup special, a task he'd taken on without being asked, anticipating Amira's busy schedule. "Better." "Different, but better." "Different how?" "He's not my business partner anymore. He's my employee, and he's not taking that responsibility lightly." "Are you happy with that arrangement?" The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? For most of my adult life, happiness had been tied to my son's well-being and success. Now, for the first time, I was evaluating my satisfaction based on my own needs and accomplishments. "I'm satisfied," I said finally. "I have complete control over something I built. I'm financially secure, and I'm contributing meaningfully to my community." That feels better than happiness. It feels like fulfillment. "And Maley? Is he satisfied working for you instead of with you?" I watched my son efficiently organizing the prep kitchen, moving with the careful attention to detail he developed over the past 6 months. "I think he's learning what it means to earn something rather than inherit it. That's probably more valuable than satisfaction." "Any regrets about how things played out?" I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I'd been on the verge of losing everything I'd worked for. My son had chosen his wife's preferences over my dignity. My financial investment had been threatened, and my role in the business I'd created had been systematically diminished. Now I owned the cafe outright, had rebuilt it into something even more connected to the community than before, and was financially secure in a way I'd never been as a minority partner in someone else's vision. I regret that it took a crisis to clarify our relationship, I said, but I don't regret the outcome. The afternoon passed quietly, with the usual mix of regular stopping by for coffee and conversation. As closing time approached, I found myself looking forward to the evening routine I'd developed, reviewing the day's numbers, planning tomorrow's specials, and enjoying the satisfaction of a business well run. Maley stayed late to help with the deep cleaning, another responsibility he'd taken on without being asked. As we worked side by side, wiping down surfaces and restocking supplies, I felt something I hadn't experienced since his childhood, the comfortable rhythm of shared purpose without conflict. "Mum?" he said as we finished loading the dishwasher. "Yes, I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that working for you these past 6 months has been the most meaningful work I've ever done." I looked at my son, noting the changes the past year had brought, not just the weight loss and stress lines, but something deeper. A humility that hadn't existed before, a willingness to listen rather than assume he knew better. "Why is that?" "Because I'm finally understanding what you built here. Not just a business, but a place where people feel valued and connected. And I'm realizing that being part of something like that is more important than being in charge of it." "And Elena, do you miss her?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I miss the person I thought she was, but I don't miss the person I became when I was trying to please her." "Good, because that person was someone I didn't recognize." "He's gone, Mom, I promise you, he's gone." As we locked up the cafe and walked to our respective cars, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the day's sales figures or customer satisfaction. For the first time since David's death 27 years ago, I felt truly in control of my own destiny. At home, I made myself dinner and sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and pink. The manila envelope with the new business cards I'd ordered sat on the table beside me, simple cream-colored cards that read Elena, Doherty, owner and operator, Seabrook Coffee Company, with the cafe's address, and my personal phone number. Owner and operator, not partner, not silent investor, not consultant, Oh no. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Amira's name on the screen, Mrs. Doughty. I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I wanted to ask you something. Of course, dear. What is it? I've been thinking about the conversation we had last week about expanding my role, and I have an idea. What if we started offering baking classes on Sunday afternoons? I could teach some of the basic techniques, and maybe you could do a monthly workshop on traditional recipes. The suggestion was brilliant, a way to generate additional revenue while strengthening community connections and sharing knowledge rather than hoarding it. That's an excellent idea, Amira. Let's discuss it tomorrow and figure out how to make it work. After I hung up, I realized that this was what success looked like at 65, not the desperate scramble for growth and recognition that had characterized my younger years, but the quiet satisfaction of building something sustainable and meaningful. The cafe would continue to evolve, with new ideas from Amira and gradual improvements that served our community's changing needs. Maley would continue working for me, proving through consistent actions that he'd learned from his mistakes. And I would continue making decisions based on my own values and priorities, without needing anyone else's approval or permission. I pulled out my phone and called Frankie. How do you feel about being my business partner? I asked when she answered. In what sense? I'm thinking about expanding, not the cafe, but the concept. Maybe a consulting business for women over 60 who want to start or reclaim their own enterprises. Frankie was quiet for a moment, then laughed a rich, delighted sound that carried clearly over the phone. Elena Doughty, you magnificent woman. Yes, I absolutely want to be your business partner. When do we start? I looked out at the ocean, dark now except for the reflection of stars on the water, and smiled. Tomorrow, I said. We start tomorrow, because at 65, I'd finally learned that it's never too late to begin again. And sometimes the best revenge is living so well that your enemies become irrelevant to your happiness. The cafe had taught me to value community over profit, dignity over convenience, and my own judgment over others' expectations. Now it was time to share those lessons with other women who might need to learn that they're stronger than they know. I went inside, pulled out a notebook, and began writing down ideas for what would eventually become Second Act Consulting. Business dedicated to helping women over 50 reclaim their power and build enterprises that reflected their values rather than others' expectations. Outside, the waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore, and inside, I continued planning the next chapter of a life that was finally, completely, my own. Up next we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.